I was born in a little mountain cabin way up in the mountains of Kentucky. They had one room that we lived in, no rug on the floor, not even wood on the floor. It was just simply a bare floor. And a stump, top of a stump cut off with 3 legs on it, that was our table. Back behind the table, we had just 2 chairs. And they were made out of limb bark, just old hickory saplings put together, and the bottom of them laced with hickory bark. And we did not even have a window in this little cabin. It had like a little wooden door that you open. I doubt whether you ever seen anything like that. A little wooden door that opened instead of a window. You keep it open in the daytime, you closed it at night. We couldn't turn on the electric lights or even burn kerosene in those days. We had what you call a grease lamp. And did you ever burn a pine knot? Just take a pine knot and light it and lay it up on a lid? It'll burn. Now, we was very poor, just the poorest of poor. Born on April the 6th, 1909. And Mother was 15 years old when I was born. Dad was 18. Now, we had no doctors. There was a midwife, and that midwife was my grandmother. And I was the first of the 9 children. The morning that I was born, Dad had bought him, Mama said, a new pair of overalls for this event. He's standing with his arms in the bib of the old overalls like the woodsmen and loggers used in those days. Mother said that Dad pushed back the window, and when they pushed the little window door back, an old robin was sitting there just singing for all that was in him. He was sitting at the side of the window, chirping as the robins sing, and that light that you see in the picture come whirling in the window, says my mother, and hung over the bed. Well, they had told around in the mountains there that this light came in, so they tried to figure it up. Some of them said it must have been the sunlight reflecting on a mirror in the house, but there was no mirror in there, and the sun wasn't up. So it was too early at 5 o'clock. Well, after I'd got up maybe 10 days old or something, they'd taken me up to a little Baptist church called Possum Kingdom. Possum Kingdom Baptist Church. And the old preacher came by, and there he offered prayer for me as a little boy. That was my first trip to church. I'm Irish on both sides. My father is strictly Irish, Branham. My mother is Harvey, only her father married a Cherokee Indian. So that broke the little line of the blood of the Irish. And Father and Mother did not go to church, and they married out of the church, and they had no religion at all. And Dad was the youngest of the boys. Of 17 children, it was a long way from being a religious person. He was a typical mountain boy that drank constantly all the time. And he had gotten in some trouble in a fight. And there had been 2 or 3 men almost killed as they fighting, shooting, and cutting one another with knives at some kind of a party up in the mountains. Really must have been a terrible fight, because they, from all the way down to Burkesville, many miles away, they sent a sheriff up after Dad. They had to run and leave Kentucky and come across the river to Indiana. At the year of about something a little over 2 years old, the first vision taking place. There's 11 months difference between me and my next brother. And he was still crawling, and I had a big rock in my hand, and I was trying to show him how hard I could throw this rock. And the old mud where the spring had run out of the ground and made the muddy ground. And I heard a bird, and it was singing up in a tree. And I looked up to that tree, and the bird flew away. And when it did, a voice spoke to me. A voice came from where the bird was in the tree, like a wind caught in the bush, and it said, "You'll live near a city called New Albany." I went in and told my mother about it. Well, she thought I was just dreaming or something. Later we moved to Indiana, and Father went to work for a man, Mr. Wathen, a rich man. He owns the Wathen distilleries. And Dad, being a poor man, yet he could not do without his drinking, so he went to making whiskey in a still. And then it worked a hardship on me, because I was the oldest of the children. I had to come and pack water to this still to keep those coils cool while they were making the whiskey. Then he got to selling it, and then he got 2 or 3 of those stills. Now that's the part I don't like to tell, but it's the truth. One day packing water from back out at this pump, which was about a city block, I was squalling to who wouldn't have it, because I'd come from school and all the boys went out to the pond fishing. I just loved to fish. And I remember coming along there with a stump toe. I had a corn cob wrapped under my toe to get out of the dust. Didn't have any shoes to wear, so we never wore shoes sometime half the winter. And if we did, it was just what we could pick up somebody would give us. And clothes to what somebody charity would give us. And I stopped under this tree. And I was sitting there just squalling. It was in September. Because I wanted to go fishing, I had to pack several tubs of water with little molasses buckets, just about that high, half a gallon, because it's just a little lad of about 7 years old. And I'd pour them in a big tub and then go back and get another 2 buckets and come back pumping it. That's the water we had. And I was crying, and all at once I heard something making a noise like a whirlwind, something like this. Now, going... just a noise like that. Well, it was awful quiet. And I looked around, and you know what a little whirlwind, I believe you call them little cyclones in the fall of the year. They pick up through the cornfield, you know, the leaves and so forth. In the autumn there, the leaves had just begun turning, and I was under a great white poplar tree, stood about halfway between the barn and the house. And I heard that noise, and I looked around. It's just as quiet as it is in this room. Not a leaf blowing nowhere, nothing. And I thought, where's that noise coming from? Well, I thought, must be away from here, just a lad. And it got louder and louder. I picked up my little buckets and squalled a couple more times and started up the lane. I was resting. And I got just a few feet from that, out from under the branches of this big tree. And oh my, it made a whirl sounding. And I turned to look, and about halfway up that tree was another whirlwind caught in that tree, just going around and around, moving those leaves. Well, I thought nothing strange about that, because it just, in that time of year, and the autumn, those whirlwinds come, we call them whirlwinds. And they pick up dust. You see them on the desert like that, same thing. So I watched, but it didn't leave off. Usually it's just a puff for a moment, and then it goes, but it had already been in there 2 minutes or more. Well, I started up the lane again, and I turned to look at this again. And when it did, a human voice, just as audible as mine is, said, "Don't you never drink, smoke, or defile your body in any way. There'll be a work for you to do when you get older." Why, it like to scared me to death. You can imagine how a little fellow felt. I dropped those buckets, and home I went just as hard as I could go, screaming the top of my voice, and I never from that day to this ever passed by that tree again. I was scared. I'd go down the other side of the garden because I thought there was a man up in that tree. And he was talking to me. Great deep voice that spoke. And then sometime about a month after that, I was playing marbles out with my little brothers out in the front yard, and all at once I had a strange feeling come on me. And I stopped and sat down on the side of the tree, and we were right up on the bank from the Ohio River. And I looked down towards Jeffersonville, and I seen a bridge rise up and go across the river, span the river, and I seen 16 men, I counted them, had dropped off of there and lost their lives on that bridge. I run in real quick and told my mother, and she thought I went to sleep. But they kept it in mind, and 22 years from then, the municipal bridge, now it's many of you cross when you cross there, crossed the river at the same place, and 16 men lost their life building that bridge across the river. I know I'm not responsible for what you think. I'm just responsible for telling the truth. When I got to be a young man, I had ideas like all young men. Going to school, I'd found them little girls, I was real bashful, and I finally got me a little girlfriend. And like all little boys, about 15 years old, I guess, and so, she was pretty. She had eyes like a dove, and she had teeth like pearl, and a neck like a swan, and she was really pretty. And another little boy, we were buddies, so he got his daddy's old Model T Ford, and we got a date with our girls, and we was going to take them out riding. We got enough, about 2 gallons of gasoline. We had to jack the back wheel up to crank it. I don't know whether you ever remember that or not, to crank it, but we was going along pretty good. And so I had a few nickels in my pocket, and we stopped at a little place and you could get a ham sandwich for a nickel. And so, I was rich. I could buy 4 of them, see? And after we'd eat the sandwiches and drink the Coke, I started taking the bottles back. And to my surprise, when I come out, my little dove was smoking a cigarette. Well, when I seen that pretty little girl just acting smart, this cigarette in her hand, that like to kill me, because I really thought I loved her. And now, this little girl, when I looked at her, my heart just bled. And I thought, poor little feller. And she said, you want a cigarette, Billy? I said, no, ma'am. I said, I don't smoke. She said, now you said you didn't dance. They want to go to a dance, and I wouldn't do it. So I said, there's a dance down there, what's called Sycamore Gardens. And I said, no, I don't dance. She said, now you don't dance, you don't smoke, you don't drink. How do you have any fun? I said, well, I like to fish. I like to hunt. That didn't interest her. So she said, take this cigarette. And I said, no, ma'am, thank you. I don't smoke. And I was standing on the fender. They had a running board on the old Ford, you remember. I was standing on that fender, steady in the back seat, she and I. And she said, you mean you won't smoke a cigarette? Said, and we girls has got more nerve than you have. I said, no, ma'am, don't believe I want to do it. She said, well, you big sissy. Oh, my. I wanted to be Big Bad Bill, so I sure didn't want nothing sissy. I wanted to be a prize fighter. That was my idea of life. So I said, sissy. I couldn't stand that. So I said, give it to me. I said, I'll show her where I'm sissy or not. Got that cigarette out and started to strike the match. When I started to strike that cigarette, just as much determined to smoke it as I am to pick up this Bible, I heard something going. I tried again. I couldn't get it to my mouth. I got to crying. I threw the thing down, and they got to laughing at me, and I walked home. Went up through the fields, sat down out there crying, and it was a terrible life. I remember one day Dad was going down the river. The boys, my brother and I, we had to take a boat and go up and down the river hunting bottles to put the whiskey in. We got a nickel a dozen for him. This man was with him, Mr. Darnbush. Dad reached in his back pocket and pulled out a little flat bottle of whiskey, handed it to him, and he took a drink, handed it back to Dad, and he taken a drink. He set it down on a little sucker on the side of the tree that went out, and Mr. Darnbush picked it up and said, here you are, Billy. I said, thank you, I don't drink. He said, a Branham? And don't drink? Everyone died with their boots on nearly. And he said, a Branham and don't drink? I said, no, sir. No, Dad said, I raised one sissy. My daddy calling me a sissy. I said, hand me that bottle. I pulled that stopper out of the top of it, determined to drink it, and when I started to turn it up, I handed the bottle back and took off down through the field as hard as I could, crying. Something wouldn't let me do it. See, I could not say, well, I was any good. I was determined to do it. But it's God, grace, amazing grace that kept me from doing those things. I wanted to do them myself, but He just wouldn't let me do it. Later on, I found a girl when I was about 22 years old. She was a darling. She was a girl that went to church, German Lutheran. Her name was Brombag. That was her name, Hope. And she was a nice girl. She didn't smoke or drink or she didn't dance or anything. A nice girl. I went with her for a little while, and then about 22, I'd made enough money I bought me an old Ford. And, we'd go out on dates together, and so we would go to church at night, and we'd come back, and I never did join church, but I just liked to go with her, because the main thought was going with her. I just might as well be honest. She is out of a nice family, used to a nice home and rugs on the floor. I remember the first rug I ever seen, I didn't know what it was. I walked around the side. I thought it was the prettiest thing I ever seen in my life. How would they put something like that on the floor? It was the first rug I'd ever seen. And laying on the floor, pretty green and red, and big rose worked in the middle of it. You know, it was a pretty thing. And so, her mother she was kind of rough. Now, she's a nice lady. And she was kind of one of these high societies, you know, and prissy-like, you know, and so she didn't have much use for me anyhow. I was just an old, plain sassafras country boy, and she thought Hope ought to go with a little better class of boy, and I think she was right. And but her father was a gentle old Dutchman, just a fine old fella. He was organizer of the Brotherhood of the Trainmen on the railroad, making about $500 a month. And them times of me making 20 cents an hour, for me to make a living for a girl like that who had been used to a nice home and rugs on the floor, and with all the family we had to take care of, and Dad broke down in health, and I had to take care of all them. So I was having a pretty rough time. I remember I made up my mind that I either had to ask her to marry me, or I must get away and let some good man marry her. I could be kind to her, but I was only making 20 cents an hour, so I couldn't make too much of a living for her. I just can't give her up. And I was in an awful shape, and day after day I'd think about it. So I was too bashful to ask her to marry me. Every night I'd make up my mind, I'm going to ask her, and when what is that, butterflies or something you get in your... all you brethren out there probably had the same experience along that. And a real funny feeling, my face would get hot. I didn't know, I couldn't ask her. So I guess you wonder how I ever got married. You know what? I wrote her a letter and asked her. And I dropped it in the mailbox. We was going to church Wednesday night, and that was on Monday morning. And I was a little afraid of her mother. All at work that day, I happened to think, what if her mother got a hold of that letter? Oh, my, then I knowed I was ruined if she ever got a hold of it. Because she didn't care too much about me. Well, I was just sweating it out. And that Wednesday night when I come, oh my, I thought, how am I going to go up there? If her mother got a hold of that letter, she'll really work me over. And so I stopped my old Ford, you know, and I had it all shined up. And so I went up and knocked at the door. Mercy, your mother come to the door. I couldn't hardly catch her, but I said, how do you do, Miss Brumbaugh? She said, how do you do, William? Oh, William. And she said, will you step in? I said, thank you. I stepped inside the door. I said, is Hope just about ready? And just then here come Hope skipping through the house, just a girl. That's 16. And she said, hi, Billy. And I said, hi, Hope. I said, you about ready for church? She said, just in a minute. I thought, oh my, she never got it. She never got it. Good, good, good. Hope never got it either, so it'll be all right, because she'd have named it to me. So I felt pretty fair. And then when I got out of church, I happened to think, what if she did get it? See? Now, I couldn't hear what Dr. Davis was saying. I look over at her and I thought, if maybe she's just holding it back and she's really going to tell me off when I get out of here for asking her that. And I couldn't hear what Brother Davis was saying. So after church, we started walking down the street together, going home, and so we walked to the old Ford, and again I said, how you feeling tonight? She said, oh, I'm all right. And we stopped the old Ford down, and we started to get out, you know, around the side, walk around the corner, go to her house, and I was walking up to the door with her. I thought, you know, she probably never got the letter, so I just might as well forget it. I'll have another week of grace anyhow. So I got feeling pretty good. She said, Billy? I said, yeah. She said, I got your letter. Oh, my. I said, you did? She said, uh-huh. Well, she just kept walking on. Never said another word. I thought, woman, tell me something. Run me away or tell me what you think about it. And I said, did you read it? She said, uh-huh. Something. See, I kept going on. I said, did you read it all? Uh-huh. And so I kept waiting. And she said, Billy, I would love to do that. She said, I love you. God bless her soul now. She's in glory. She said, I love you. Said, I think we ought to tell the parents about it. Don't you think so? And I said, honey, listen, let's start this out with a 50-50 proposition. I said, I'll tell your daddy if you'll tell your mother. Rooting the worst part off on her to begin with. She said, all right, if you'll tell Daddy first. I said, all right, I'll tell him Sunday night. And so Sunday night come, I brought her home from church, and she kept looking at me, and I looked, it's 9:30, it's time for me to get going. So Charlie was sitting at his desk typing away, and Miss Brumback sitting over the corner doing some kind of a crocheting, or them little hooks you put over things, I don't know what you call it. And so she was doing some of that kind of stuff, and Hope kept looking at me. She'd frown at me, motion to her daddy. And oh my, I thought, what if he says no? So I started out to the door. I said, well, I guess I better go. And I walked to the door, and she started over at the door with me. She'd always come to the door and tell me good night. So I started at the door, and she said, aren't you going to tell him? And I said, I'm sure trying to, but I don't know how I'm going to go to do it. And she said, I'll just go back and you call him out. So she walked back and left me standing there. And I said, Charlie? He turned around and said, yeah, Bill. I said, could I talk to you just a minute? He said, sure. He turned around from his desk. Miss Brumback looked at him, looked over at Hope, looked at me. I said, would you come out on the porch? He said, yes, I'll come out. So he walked out on the porch. I said, sure is a pretty night, isn't it? He said, yes, it is. I said, sure been warm. Certainly has. He looked at me. And I said, I've been working so hard. I said, even my hands is getting callous. He said, you can have her, Bill. Oh my, you can have her. I thought, oh, that's better. I said, you really mean it, Charlie? I said, Charlie, look, I know it. She's your daughter, and you got money. And he reached over and got me by the hand. He said, Bill, listen, money ain't all things that's in human life. I said, Charlie, I only make 20 cents an hour, but I love her. She loves me. I promise you, Charlie, that I'll work till the calluses wear off of my hands to make her a living. I'll be just as true to her as I could be. He said, I believe that, Bill. He said, listen, Bill, I want to tell you. He said, happiness don't altogether take money to be happy. He said, just be good to her, and I know you will. I said, thank you, Charlie. I sure will do that. And it's her time to tell Mama. I don't know how she got by, but we got married.